Let's talk us some conspiracies, shall we? Hi everyone, Leo Notenboom here for askleo.com. One of the interesting aspects of doing the job that I do is I hear from a wide variety of people. As you might expect, there are questions from all across the spectrum and around the world. But there is a subset of folks that believe what I'm going to just sort of generalize as conspiracy theories. And I have to say right up front, I don't believe them. And what I want to do in this video is actually talk a little bit about conspiracy theories and some specific ones that I don't believe and why I don't believe they're true. Now, of course, because people who believe conspiracy theories are usually very vocal, it's likely that this will get a little controversial. And of course, I'll be monitoring and managing comments on this video and the parent article closely. But do keep an open mind and try and understand some of the things that I'm going to present. When it comes to, well, just about anything, not just conspiracies, but other questions of logic, there are two rules of thumb that I absolutely love that I think more people would benefit from applying more often. The first one is Occam's razor. That's a very simple one. It simply says, the simplest explanation is usually the best. That seems pretty straightforward. It's a very simple razor. It's a very simple decision-making tool. When you're faced with a complex explanation for some kind of behavior that you don't understand, and a much simpler one that also explains the behavior, the simpler one is more likely to be accurate. So I use Occam's razor frequently. Now, the one that I actually end up using more frequently, especially when it comes to technology, is Hanlon's razor. That one is never attribute to malice that which is adequately explained by stupidity. Now, I expand that a little bit to include not just stupidity, but also ignorance or incompetence, because there are a lot of things that happen, again, especially in the world of technology, that are more than adequately explained by bad decisions, ignorant decisions, stupid decisions than there are by some kind of large conspiracy driving whatever it is. So let's talk about what some of those specific things are. Data collection is used to track you individually. It is not. Data collection, and we hear a lot about it. Windows is doing it, Google is doing it, Microsoft is doing it, Facebook is doing it. Everybody's collecting data. And they're collecting data about your activity. But they're not using it to track you as an individual. What they're doing is collecting that data, collating that data, and analyzing that data to see what large numbers of people are doing. Now, let's take a look at my newsletter. I actually do track who opens the newsletter. Do I care that you specifically opened my newsletter? No, not really. What I care about is how many people open the newsletter, because that way I know whether or not my newsletter is actually something people are interested in. If 1,000 people open it one week and 500 people open it the next week, that's something I should be paying attention to. I don't care who those 500 or 1,000 people are. I just care about the number. And I believe that is very, very true for all of the big tech companies. Apple, Microsoft, Google, Facebook, etc. They don't care about you as an individual. What they care about is what people like you do. The best example I have is something like, if 1,000 people happen to click on an article or an advertisement about, say, Instant Pots, then there's a likelihood that those 1,000 people might also be interested in some other cooking supplies. They're not saying because Leo clicked on a pot, he's now interested in cooking supplies. No, it's people that did it, as opposed to individuals. That is an incredibly difficult concept, I think, to understand. I get that. But it is very, very true. Honestly, there is simply too much data for these companies to be able to sift through it all to trace something down to the individual level. And like I said, Ultimately, they don't care. They want to know what masses of people are doing. And the way you build a mass of data is you collect it from individuals, but then you lose the individuality. You act on the mass. Another one, Windows 11 exists to sell more hardware. It does not. More specifically, the accusation is that additional hardware requirements were added to Windows 11 to basically invalidate or make current computers obsolete. That people would be forced to purchase new machines in order to run Windows 11. There are a number of things that are basically data points to me against that from happening. Simply, you don't have to upgrade. There's nothing that says you have to upgrade to Windows 11. You can keep running Windows 10 until the cows come home. There's no reason to get rid of your machine until you are ready to get rid of that machine. So it kind of fails the very first test. Corporations, Microsoft's true customer for Windows, I believe, they in fact have pushed back on some of these requirements, and some of them in fact have ways of installing Windows 11 on machines that technically don't meet all of the so-called requirements. So the fact that Microsoft is pulling it back for corporations, well, clearly that's because the corporations don't want to buy more machines because they're expanding whatever. Great. You don't have to, and they don't have to. There's another way to get Windows 11 on a large number of machines that would otherwise be incompatible, and yet it still works. The new hardware requirements, specifically things like the TPM, have been explained as requirements to improve the security of Windows. This makes a lot of sense to me. To me, it is the simplest solution because, let's face it, security has always been, if not one of Windows' weak points, it is certainly one of its weak points when it comes to reputation or publicity or news. By doing everything possible that they can, including using this as an opportunity to say, hey, let's use some hardware to make this thing more secure, it just makes sense that Microsoft would use this transition from Windows 10 to Windows 11 to make that happen. And finally, honestly, there's not one shred of evidence that has been produced that would indicate in any way, shape, or form that Windows 11 was architected specifically to cause hardware to become obsolete and to increase sales of new machines. As with all of these theories that I'm talking about, I am absolutely willing to be convinced otherwise. But there has to be evidence, not just hearsay, but actual evidence to support the theory. Because once you have evidence, it's no longer a theory, it's a thing. So keep that in mind. Another one, OneDrive and Google Drive and Dropbox and all of the other cloud storage services, they exist to slurp up your data. No, they do not. They are wonderful cloud storage solutions, and I use all of them. In fact, I use Dropbox, OneDrive, Google Drive, Proton Drive, iCloud. I think I may have missed one. But the bottom line here is that they are wonderful ways to actually improve your own both security and resiliency in the face of problems. However, many people feel that OneDrive, I'll use it specifically, exists only so that Microsoft can read all your data. No, they don't care about your data. There are a number of reasons that this just doesn't make sense. For example, if Microsoft wants to read your data, you're already using Windows. They have access to it all from the start. They don't need OneDrive to make that happen. No one is forcing you to use cloud storage. Now, I'll talk about OneDrive in a minute, but you are not being forced to use cloud storage. If you don't want to use it, don't use it. There's nobody that says you have to. No one is preventing you from encrypting what you put in cloud storage. In fact, it's an important solution to keeping a lot of your data safe. This is something that the manufacturers, the providers themselves have talked about. Personally, I use Cryptomator to encrypt a subset of what I throw out into Dropbox, specifically because I want that data secure, not from Dropbox, but from whatever might happen to that data, should there be a breach, should something happen, and so forth. That data remains completely secure. If OneDrive existed specifically to look at your data, you wouldn't be able to encrypt it. You wouldn't be able to upload encrypted things. It just doesn't make sense. Now, the amount of data that would need to be processed is enormous. It truly is imaginable. We joke sometimes about the NSA having unimaginable amounts of computing power. Trust me, whatever they have, it's not enough. There is just not enough computing power to basically analyze the data that you put in the cloud storage in the way that you think it happens. And again, one of the things I've been saying forever, I honestly believe that you and I just aren't that interesting. Again, I'll believe it if there's evidence. Now, there is one specific scenario that has made this particular conspiracy theory more difficult to debunk. And that is Microsoft's ham-handed approach to making you use OneDrive. Basically, they've just made it the default everywhere. And it seems like they are forcing you to use it. They're not. You can undo all that. You don't have to use OneDrive, but it's not obvious. This is a case where I truly believe Hanlon's razor. This is a case where the explanation for what's going on here has nothing to do with maliciousness and everything to do with really, really bad design decisions and even some stupidity thrown in. Now, another one. Smart home devices exist to spy on us specifically. Again, they don't. The nature of this theory is that a lot of voice-activated devices like Amazon's Echo or Google Home or any of the others that are out there, they are constantly listening to what we say in order to spy on us, in order to maybe show targeted ads or worse. Now, I actually did a little bit of research on this one because I was kind of curious if anybody had done some research on it, and indeed, I've got a link to an article, How Amazon Uses Echo Smart Speaker Conversations to Target Ads. It's a 2022 article that basically talks about exactly what Amazon does and does not use to target advertisements. It's very simple. If you are having a conversation or instructing the Amazon device in some way, like say, device, turn on the lights, or device, watch this movie, that data, of course, Amazon has, and they're using it to potentially target advertisements. What they are not doing is listening in all the time. They aren't. There have been a number of ways, and honestly, it would be really easy to determine if that's happening with a simple network sniffer. And I'm absolutely convinced that people have done this, and it hasn't made news because it's boring. It's not happening. Indeed, friends and I have run some really informal experiments where we were sitting around in a room that happened to have one of the Amazon devices in it. And we picked a topic that was not germane to any of us in the room. We had never spoken about it. We'd never thought about it. And we all said something about that specific topic, not engaging the device, just talking about it with the device in the room. The conspiracy would have us saying that we would expect advertisements or some kind of impact based on whatever it was we were talking about. Of course, nothing happened. We never did see anything that seemed to relate to what we had been discussing in front of the Amazon Echo speaker. So it could happen. Of course it could happen. It's just extremely unlikely, even if only for the immense negative repercussions on whichever company ended up doing it once it was discovered. Again, I'll believe it only if there's evidence. Another one. Social media exists to control our minds. This one, I didn't think of myself, to be honest. ChatGPT, when I basically asked it for some more ideas in this realm, it threw this one at me, and I thought it was kind of interesting. Honestly, given the evidence, it's kind of hard to argue that it's not happening. However, my take on it is actually a little bit differently. That is simply this. It's not the companies that are looking to control us beyond getting us to engage as much and as long as possible. That's their goal. They want us to engage with their specific social media as much as we possibly can so that they can show ads to us or do whatever it is they do with us. No, the people that are actively trying to control our thoughts, the ones who are trying to influence us, often in completely negative ways, are third parties. Sometimes they are companies that have an agenda. Sometimes they are governments that have an agenda. Sometimes they are political entities that have an agenda. And they use social media in a variety of ways to lead and mislead us into believing whatever it is they are trying to promote. So, no, I don't believe social media exists simply to control us, other than trying to get us to engage as much as possible. It's the people using social media that are actually the real culprits here. Now, I mentioned that I used ChatGPT for a couple of more ideas. I did want to quickly hit some of the ones that it raised for me, which I also thought were kind of interesting. One that I'd never thought of, and honestly I'd never heard of, is this concept of hidden messages in software updates. That somehow when you get an update from software, there's some kind of a hidden code or a message or subliminal message or so forth that is somehow meant to influence us. Again, no. As always, I'll believe it when I see the evidence. There is no evidence to my knowledge. Quantum computing has a lot of people concerned, and I think that rightfully so. I think that in the years to come, it's going to be a very interesting thing that will change the landscape, specifically of cryptography. The conspiracy theory is that it already exists, that the government of choice, has already a quantum computer that is rendering existing encryption ineffective. I don't believe that's true. Honestly, if there were quantum computing at the government level, I don't think they'd be using it to spy on us. I think that they would be using it to protect their own data as it travels around their infrastructure. I do think that this is going to be an issue in the future. But right now, quantum computing is not something that I'm worried about. Another one is AI as a tool for mass surveillance. The concept here is that artificial intelligence in various flavors, especially in public spaces, is being used not just for security, but for mass surveillance, profiling, and tracking of individuals beyond what is publicly acknowledged. All I can say here is that maybe. It's not as all-encompassing as some might believe, especially when you take a look at TV shows, detective shows, cop shows, and so forth. They seem to be able to find everybody very quickly on CCTV or using AI to quickly narrow down a large pool of suspects. I don't believe that's the case. However, I could be wrong. Or it could happen sooner than I believe it will. When it happens, or if it's happening, I would absolutely love to see that evidence. Of all the conspiracy theories we've talked about so far, that might be the one that is closest to reality. And again, this one is one that I think varies dramatically based on what country you happen to live in. So what does this all boil down to? I think there's another concept that a lot of people are missing. They have a lot of faith in people's ability to keep a secret. It's Benjamin Franklin, I think, who said, 3 may keep a secret if 2 of them are dead. I think I ran across this originally when talking about the possibility that the moon landing was a hoax. When you think about the sheer number of people who would have had to have coordinated on something like that and kept it a secret for all these years, just doesn't pass the sniff test. It's too complex. There's no way that somebody somewhere wouldn't have leaked lots of documents or lots of things that would have proven it otherwise. The same is true for almost every conspiracy theory we've talked about. It generally takes many more people than is feasible to keep a secret. As a result, the fact that there haven't been leaks, the fact that there hasn't been any proof, to me, means that it is highly unlikely that these guys are true. One of the things I think that really plays into this as well is that we're afraid of things we don't understand. I mean, when you think about it, flying, who understands how a large metal tube flies through the sky. It's nerve-wracking. I've flown enough times, and sure, I get butterflies. I get a little nervous every time. I get the science. I understand how it's supposed to work, but it's still pretty magical that it does. I think the same is very true for technology. We don't understand to our core how this stuff works, how it's possible that an ad could be following me around the internet, where in fact, behind the scenes, there's a very logical progression that doesn't involve spying on you. It simply involves monitoring people's habits, something very benign. But because we don't understand technology, it is much more easy to jump to conclusions that simply aren't true. Now, I do want to say that stupidity and ignorance, they're not benign per se. Those are problems. Just take a look at the mess we've got over in OneDrive right now. But they are not intentionally malicious. And I think that that is a lot of what really needs to be thought about every time you think that somebody's after you, somebody's spying on you, somebody's collecting your data, something is doing something with malicious intent. I'm 99.999% sure that it ain't happening. But I'm open to that 0.0001% probability if you show me the proof. For updates, for comments, for links related to this video, visit askleo.com/167655. And I will reiterate that because this is potentially controversial, I'll be keeping a close eye on comments because I don't want the discussion to run off the rails. I'm Leo Notenboom, and this is askleo.com. Thanks for watching.